Okay, Mark, are you ready to start, you think?
Yes, let's start.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Global Partnership on Plastic Pollution and Marine Litters webinar on sea-based sources of plastic pollution and marine litter. I'm Fredrik Haag, co-chair of the GPML, alongside with Sarah Da Silva from Environment Climate Change Canada, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's webinar. Please note that the webinar will be recorded and the presentation will be sent to you all afterwards. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers who will share their expertise on this critical issue, impacting our oceans and marine environment globally. But before we begin, let me quickly run through today's agenda. First, I will give you some quick updates on the GPML's recent membership statistics and the digital platform. And after that, we will hear from Kisten Gilardi from GESAMP, who will give us an overarching introduction to sea-based sources of plastic pollution and marine litter. Hannah Pragnell-Raasch from the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, who will dive into the governance and policy approaches needed to tackle abandoned, lost, or discarded fishing gear. Gudrun Janssens from BIMCO will offer insights from the vital shipping industry's perspective on addressing this issue. And Maartje Volbert from the Open Universiteit in the Netherlands will preview an exciting new e-learning course on sea-based sources of marine litter. We will reserve time at the end to answer questions put forward to our speakers, so please get your questions ready as we go along, and we will try to respond to them after the presentations or during the webinar via the chat box. Or if time runs short, we may reply to them by email as well. Tackling plastic pollution in our ocean requires a comprehensive approach, looking at all sources and drivers. And today's focus on sea-based and maritime sources is very important, as these pathways of plastic pollution are significant and require tailored solutions. I'm very eager to learn from our esteemed guests, and I know you are all too. But first, allow me to provide a few GPML updates. So our membership currently consists of 646 members spanning 96 countries. And the membership is made up of civil society organizations, private sector industries, government agencies, international organizations, as well as academic institutions. The GPML digital platform is a one-stop shop for data and information related to plastic pollution and marine litter. And it now has over 1,400 active users and recently underwent a revamp and now features a new registration page for organizations that want to become a member, an updated forum page for users who wish to collaborate and share knowledge with other users, and a data hub with enhanced data layers. The platform is now accessible in English, French, and Spanish. So we would like to remind participants that drop-in sessions are also available for those who need support with signing up and navigating the digital platform. The link will be provided in the chat. And now, without further ado, I'd like to present our first speaker, Kisten Gilardi. Kisten is a wildlife veterinarian at the School of Veterinary Medicine at the University of California, United States, where she leads the Karen C. Dreyer Wildlife Health Center. Since 2006, Kisten has directed the California Lost Fishing Gear Recovery Project, and she has served on the joint group of experts on scientific aspects of marine environmental protection, GESAMP, since 2019, where she chairs Working Group 43 on sea-based sources of marine litter. Kisten also serves as on the Expert Advisory Council for the Global Ghost Gear Initiative. Kisten, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Fredrik. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Next slide, please. I wanted to first orient you a bit to GESAMP, which is the acronym for the Joint Group of Experts on the Scientific Aspects of Marine Environmental Protection. We are an independent scientific advisory body to the UN agencies on matters concerning environmental impacts on the ocean. And I have had the privilege of chairing Working Group 43 on sea-based sources of marine litter, which is sponsored by the International Maritime Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the UN Environment Program. Next slide. So this working group was established as a result of the increasing amount of plastic that is documented in the ocean, and perhaps more importantly, the increased concern that presents to organizations, governments, individuals around the world. And over the last several years, there have been some very important papers published on the quantity in different compartments of the ocean, and the numbers are staggering. And so this is a very, very active area of research on both quantity of plastic in the ocean, but also its impacts on biota and processes in the ocean. Next slide. One of the sort of current dogmas is that when you look at the burden of litter in the ocean, 80% of it is coming from land-based sources and 20% is coming from sea-based sources. That number, that proportion is really probably debatable, but it really doesn't matter. The point is that plastic in the ocean is coming from different sources. And so next slide, please. Working Group 43 was established to look specifically at sea-based sources of marine litter, and we published our first technical report in late 2021. It's available on GESAMP's website. Next slide. I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of summarizing what we learned and included in that first technical report, and also tell you about what we're working on currently. I know Hannah will be talking about the policy instruments for addressing plastic litter in the ocean, but I just wanted to make sure everybody's aware of the sort of most significant or main legal frameworks that have bearing on the issue of litter in the ocean. Of course, the UNCLOS, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, MARPOL Annex 5, the London Convention, London Protocol. These are all very important and powerful international legal instruments for guiding us in addressing the issue of plastic in the ocean. Next slide, please. So obviously, when it comes to ocean-based sources, there are some significant categories, fishing being one of them. Fishing is a significant source of plastic in the ocean, largely because fishing equipment is comprised of polymers for all the reasons that people make things out of plastic. Plastic is incredibly strong, it's incredibly durable, and yet when this gear gets lost, abandoned, or discarded in the ocean, it is contributing to the ocean plastic burden, and we'll be hearing more about that from Hannah. Next slide. The types of polymers in fishing gear that comprise fishing gear, and again, we're talking about fishing gear in its totality, so nets, pots, traps, lines, etc. Really run the gamut of all types of polymers. So next, you can click, please. In our report, you can see a summary of, at least as of late 2021, of what is understood about what types of plastic comprise components of fishing gear, and why we're concerned about that as a source in the ocean. Next slide. There's also the dogma, again, is that there are 640,000 tons of plastic going into the ocean every year, and that's coming from abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear. The math around that is quite sketchy is not the right word, but quite loose. And that's still a matter of debate, how much fishing industry is contributing to plastic in the ocean. Click, please. But there have been some recent estimates of the quantity of fishing gear that is lost by fishing globally. And Kelsey Richardson's paper in 2019 provided us with estimates of how many nets, as a percentage of total nets put in the water every year around the world, how many are lost. And you can imagine that that's a quite staggering quantity of plastic going into the ocean. Next slide. Aquaculture was also, as a plastic source in the ocean, was also investigated by our working group. Fortunately, we had a couple of really good summary reports to refer to, but this is an important area to be keeping an eye on. The graph on the left from the FAO just shows the increase in the amount of aquaculture that's happening worldwide. Next, please click. And that the most significant form of plastic that is coming from aquaculture operations going into the ocean is extended polystyrene or styrofoam, which is the most documented type of aquaculture-related litter. And in some parts of the world is the predominant form of plastic marine litter on beaches and floating at the sea surface. Next slide, please. So we're going to hear more about shipping as a plastic source from Ms. Janssens, but I do want to point out that we spent quite a bit of time in our initial study and in our initial report looking at shipping as a plastic source. Of course, waste from shipping comes in many different forms, and these are all potential sources of plastic into the ocean. One of our findings in our initial report was that passenger ships are disproportionately contributing to the plastic in the ocean in terms of when you look at number of vessels, passenger ships versus, for example, cargo ships. The passenger ships are thought to contribute up to a quarter of the waste coming from shipping. And recreational boating in some parts of the world is also a very significant source of plastic, especially single-use items like plastic water bottles. Next slide, please. We've also, in our initial report, took a first look at hull coatings, marine paints as sources of plastic in the ocean. Paints, hull coatings have a component within them of polymers that act as binding agents. And of course, you can imagine that paint wears off and paint is reapplied and ships are broken down. And these processes are likely contributors, especially of microplastics into the ocean. And then there have been some very high-profile container losses that have resulted in significant quantities of plastics lost accidentally into the ocean. Next slide. So we're in our second phase, working group 43. So the scientific parties of the London Convention, London Protocol asked us to look further into hull coatings as a source of plastic litter in London Convention, London Protocol waste streams. We're looking at the amounts and types of microplastics in anti-fouling paint and hull coatings, and also looking at the scrapping and abandonment of fiber-reinforced polymer vessels or fiberglass vessels as sources of plastic. And then for the Food and Agriculture Organization, we're analyzing the trade-offs between the economic and environmental trade-offs, costs and benefits of abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear and drifting fish aggregating device or DFADS recovery. We're identifying elements that should be included in ALDFG monitoring programs, including new technologies and tools for monitoring, and also looking at the causal links between illegal, unreported, and unregulated or IUU fishing and abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear. So we are putting together our first draft, working on that together as a working group, and anticipate having a final report to GESAMP for internal and external review by midsummer. And I think that's it. Next slide, please. Yes, thanks.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for setting the scene so perfectly for the rest of the speakers as well. I think it was a very good first presentation for today's discussions. Thank you. And as we mentioned, please feel free to post questions in the chat, and I encourage the speakers to have a look there as well and see if there's anything they can answer as we go along through the webinar. Our next speaker is Hannah Pragnell-Raasch. Hannah has been part of the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, GGGI, since its inception in 2015, originally as a member of the Build Evidence Working Group and then sitting on the GGGI's Expert Advisory Council. Now as a full-time member of the GGGI leadership team, she provides expertise for GGGI's policy and advocacy work, including working with government members on the national and international policies for managing fishing gear, leading government roundtables, and providing recommendations on various policy interventions, such as internationally legally binding instruments for plastic pollution. She also leads a number of GGGI signature projects and is responsible for the development of a number of GGGI technical reports and knowledge products. Thank you so much for being with us today, Hannah, and I hand over to you.
Thanks so much, and thank you all for being here. And it's great to see so many people online interested in this topic. So we can skip to the next slide, please. So just going to give a quick overview, a snapshot of what the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is. And then the rest of the presentation is going to be looking specifically at the different governance structures for abandoned, lost and discarded fishing gear, and just pulling out some of those key ones, because of course we haven't got time to go into detail with all of them. So next slide, please. So the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is a cross-sectoral alliance committed to driving solutions to address abandoned, lost and discarded fishing gear. So as Kisten mentioned, there's a number of different reasons, drivers as to why gear becomes lost, but inevitably where fishing takes place, gear may become lost either accidentally or intentionally with regards to illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. So the aims of the GGGI is to improve the health of marine ecosystems, protect aquatic life from harm, and safeguard human health and livelihoods. It's not intended to sort of prohibit fishing, of course, but make fishing practices more sustainable and prevent the occurrence of gear becoming lost, but mitigating the impact of gear if it does become lost, and then of course retrieving gear that is lost through targeted remediation efforts. Next slide, please. So across the globe, we have 138 member organizations, from other non-governmental organizations to private sector, academia, 23 government members, as well as our signature projects and small grants projects that we have helped support with funding at various locations across the globe. So we try and help support organizations to implement best practices on the ground that can be scaled up and also applied across different geographies as well. Next slide, please. So in an attempt to try and provide some guidance to the best practices for the management of fishing gear to prevent, mitigate and remediate those impacts as mentioned, we developed, in consultation with a number of different stakeholders, we developed the best practice framework for the management of fishing gear in capture fisheries. And then a few years later published the best practice framework for the management of aquaculture gear, recognizing that aquaculture is a sector that is rapidly expanding over recent years. So we want to ensure that that is addressed, of course, can be a source of ALDFG as well. So these two frameworks provide stakeholders with best practices to prevent, mitigate and remediate the loss of gear through the entire seafood supply chain. And they also include a relative risk analysis for different gear classes. So this combines the likelihood of certain gear becoming lost with the potential impact of that gear should it become lost in the environment. And then that risk assessment can provide guidance as to what could be the most appropriate best practices to prevent it becoming lost or mitigate those impacts should it become lost. Next slide, please. So in terms of governance around ALDFG, over the years, there's been significant advancement with regards to international regulations around marine plastic litter, which incorporates ALDFG within that as well. It is a very specific type of marine plastic pollution. It's the most pervasive form of marine plastic pollution, being in fact that it's obviously designed to capture marine life. So in that regard, well, not just marine life, marine and freshwater, but But in regards to that, of course, when it does become lost, it continues to fish. So any governance that we can help try and decrease the impacts should gear become lost is obviously making an advance in trying to prevent those detrimental impacts, not just to the health of the aquatic ecosystem, but also to safeguard fisheries and also support people's livelihoods that depend on fishing. So this timeline is just doesn't include every single thing that has been achieved over the years, but captures some of the main ones that have advanced the governance of ALDFG. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the key ones that have advanced of recent years, but this isn't exhaustive. It's not the only ones, but just trying to capture some of the key ones. So next slide, please. So when it comes to international policy, the International Maritime Organization is the United Nations agency that's responsible for the safety and security of shipping, and is also responsible to ensure the prevention of marine pollution from ships. The MARPOL Annex 5 is specifically the annex that is geared towards the prevention of pollution by garbage from ships. And within MARPOL Annex 5, there was a resolution adopted in 2021 for an action plan to specifically address marine plastic litter from ships. And this includes specific provisions to manage ALDFG as well. So the key pieces in the action plan regarding ALDFG specifically correspond to the availability and adequacy of port reception facilities, so ensuring that there's adequate reception facilities at port to collect end-of-life gear or ALDFG that is retrieved. And also the most significant advancement under MARPOL Annex 5 was the consideration of a goal-based requirement to make the marking of fishing gear mandatory. And that would be in cooperation with the FAO's voluntary guidelines of the marking of fishing gear, which I'm going to come to in a second. So, as well as also within MARPOL Annex 5, the promotion of reporting of lost fishing gear. So whilst these provisions are definitely a step forward in the governance of ALDFG, the frameworks are still being determined. So the goal-based requirement for the marking of fishing gear is still under consideration, and the specific criteria with regards to that hasn't been yet determined. Next slide, please. So the FAO as well have made advances as well towards managing ALDFG. In 2018, the voluntary guidelines of the marking of fishing gear were officially endorsed at the 33rd session of the Committee of Fisheries. As it says in the title, these are voluntary by nature, so they're not actually a mandate for nations to implement these measures, but provide a framework and guidelines as to how to integrate effective marking systems for fishing gear so that it can be retrieved if it does become lost, and also that it's clearly marked as well to help prevent gear conflicts or gear interacting with other marine vessels that might cause it to become detached or damaged and then lost. And the voluntary guidelines also are a tool to assist states in meeting their obligations under the FAO's Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which Kisten briefly mentioned in her slides, and again is another sort of advancement with regards to managing ALDFG internationally. Next slide, please. So one of the most recent internationally relevant opportunities for the management of ALDFG is the recent mandate from the United Nations Environment Assembly to end plastic pollution and develop an international legally binding instrument to end plastic pollution, including in the marine environment. So at the beginning of the when the mandate was introduced, there was a specific call to include the marine environment and recognize sea-based sources. Of course, as the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, we felt it was very important that the ILBI would include specific regulations around ALDFG, considering that it is the most harmful form of plastic pollution. There is also a very disproportionate impact on small island developing states and less developed countries. And the current governance framework lacks a sort of overarching coordination and cohesion. The current legislation in place for managing ALDFG is quite fragmented. So the ILBI provides an opportunity to create a sort of umbrella that creates coordination and collaboration around the effective management of ALDFG. So progress to date has seen definitely an increased momentum of support around ALDFG. In INC2, which was the second round of the International Negotiating Committee, the options paper was being discussed, and ALDFG only had a couple of mentions within the proposed text, whereas the zero draft saw the inclusion of ALDFG specifically under waste management. And then we've also continued to work with government members to try and advance the ambition with regards to ALDFG to make sure that there's a full life cycle approach to the management of plastic fishing and aquaculture gear. So a couple of weeks ago, I was at INC4 and the revised zero draft text was actually being negotiated, and there's quite strong support for a full life cycle approach. So going beyond just waste management measures. Waste management, of course, is very important, but it doesn't address the upstream and midstream impacts of fishing gear. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we see that ILBI is a unique opportunity to provide this sort of overarching governance structure to managing ALDFG across the full life cycle approach. So some of the provisions that we have been advocating for during the INC process have included improving gear design to include traceability, having clear design and labeling standards, as well as encouraging design for circularity. Gear marking has also been included with that and ensuring complementarity with existing frameworks, such as the provisions being proposed under IMO, also a no-fault lost gear reporting protocol, effective port side collection facilities for end-of-life gear, but also ALDFG, and then appropriate and just disposal of for remediation. So we're really trying to encourage member states to take on to advocate and encourage provisions that cover the full life cycle of plastic fishing and aquaculture gear to ultimately prevent the impacts. Next slide, please. So in summary, I guess the key takeaways are, although there's been advances made within the governance of ALDFG, the international landscape is still very fragmented and provisions are largely voluntary in nature. So there's no international framework that exists to cover the full life cycle of gear, including capture fisheries and aquaculture. So again, just to reiterate, the ILBI is probably a unique opportunity to include specific provisions for the management of ALDFG that can serve as an umbrella to provide coordination and cohesion across the international landscape for the governance of ALDFG, and also help strengthen and advance the existing measures that are currently in place. So I think that is it. Next slide. Yeah. So that was just a quick little snapshot. There's a lot obviously to cover, but of course open to to questions at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, for this insight and into the issue of ghost gear. I think it was very, very useful, and I learned a lot so far as well. And as you said, we'll hopefully have time for a few questions at the end. I can see there's one or two in the Q&A in the chat box as well. You might be able to respond to already. With that, I will move to our third speaker, Gudrun Janssens. Gudrun studied chemistry with a specialization in environmental sciences in Ghent, Belgium. And in 2000, she began her career at the Public Waste Agency of Flanders and completed her studies at the Maritime Institute of the University of Ghent. As a senior policy advisor and Belgian delegation member to the IMO, she spent over 15 years shaping policies on ship waste management, waste shipments, and ship recycling. And in 2018, she became the Director of Environment and Maritime Safety at the European Community of Ship Owners Associations, ECSA. And she later served as Head of Environmental and Technical Affairs at the Royal Belgian Ship Owners Association, focusing on climate change, air emissions, bunker fuel quality, and ship recycling. Currently, though, she runs the BIMCO office in Brussels, aligning the organization with EU decision-making processes and expanding its global influence. Over to you, Gudrun, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Fredrik, for the intro, and happy to be here. Next slide, please. So just for those of you that are not entirely familiar with BIMCO and what it is we do, I just like to say a few words. We're basically the world's largest direct entry shipping association with over 2,000 members globally, represented in around 130 countries. We operate on a non-profit basis. And we have our head office is based in Copenhagen, Denmark, but we have offices, as Fredrik said, in Brussels, but also Athens, Houston, London, Shanghai, and Singapore. So our membership, next slide, please. Our membership is the share of the world cargo fleet is around 62%, and it's divided. We're well presented in the main shipping segments, 53% tanker fleet, 60% dry bulk, and 87% of the container fleet is a BIMCO member, actually. And also, if you look at it from a geographical point of view, you see that BIMCO is well represented in the main shipping hubs. But enough about us and our members. Let's focus on why we are here. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kick off by saying a few words on the potential sources of marine plastics. And actually, there are numerous ways in which plastic can reach the ocean directly via shipping. Although it should, and it has been said by previous presenter, it should always be noted that the volumes are often tiny compared to those originating from land or other sea-based industries like fishing, as has been mentioned. Nonetheless, we fully recognize that shipping or that plastics is an entirely human-generated pollution. There are, of course, no natural sources of plastics in the environment. And in fact, all industries and individuals should come together to address the issue. In fact, shipping has the opportunity here and an opportunity to play a leading role in the reduction of marine plastic litter. So my presentation today will highlight some of the actions that are being taken or could be taken to ensure that shipping and shipping industry plays its part in tackling this problem. So the image here summarizes actually where plastics may originate from. So on the right-hand side, you have the larger plastics, which are those that are visible to the human eye. These can be significantly large, although thankfully not significantly when we're talking about total ship, not significantly frequent when we're talking about total ship losses and wrecks. But plastic may also reach the ocean through accidental losses. Thinking about, for instance, improperly secured bins on deck that get into the marine environment. And in some cases, sometimes these plastics that get in the marine environment are deliberate, although we must be clear that the legal framework is very clear and this is not permitted at all. Another source is end-of-life management of ship and ship recycling, which can also present a potential source of plastics to the marine environment. Of course, if proper downstream waste management is not in place. Then in the middle, and it's actually in the middle of both microplastics and larger plastics, is container losses, because containers on its own, they can contain large plastic items and they can be a pollution on its own. But when they contain plastic pellets, for instance, these plastic pellets can easily decompose into microplastics. And then we're moving to the left-hand side of the diagram where we have the sources of microplastics. They can be also contained in ships' grey water, in discharges of sewage, it has been mentioned, right, from anti-fouling paint, or transferred from sea area to sea area in ballast water. Next slide, please. So yeah, coming to the, next slide, please. We're coming to the main culprit, and which is actually, what we done some work around at BIMCO, is single-use plastics and plastic bottles. So an understanding the scale of the problem on board ships is crucial in advocating for change. If you assume that all ships provide drinking water for seafarer in plastic bottles, we're looking at approximately 1 billion plastic bottles, which are being used annually in commercial ships. This figure is based on a survey we conducted among our membership back in 2021, and that revealed that on average, seafarers use between 1 and 2 1.5 liter bottles a day. It's an estimate, and it likely falls short of the actual number of bottles used, as it doesn't account for the 3 liter minimum requirement for drinking water per seafarer per day, nor does it include the consumption on cruise liners and ferries, where it's likely to be higher, and bottles used are also often tinier. Which would increase the number of bottles actually per passenger. And it also doesn't include the number of possible emergency stock on board, or bottles that are being purchased by seafarers themselves. But what we do know is that many ship owners and operators have luckily started taking action to reduce the use of these single-use plastics on board, and the bottles particularly, through the implementation of advanced drinking water systems. Not only does reducing the use of single-use plastics align with moral and environmental imperatives to prevent plastic pollution, even with good waste management on board, the recycling will be hugely dependent on the country of discharge, and it's also beneficial from a business perspective. By opting for an alternative to bottled water, ship owners can actually demonstrate their commitment to sustainability and responsible resource usage, enhance their reputation, and save costs over time. Additionally, reducing single-use plastic consumption globally will also reduce, logically, the demand for raw materials, and particular fossil fuels. It will save energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions and conserve water ultimately. Finally, committing to such initiatives contributes to environmental, social, and governance initiatives and reporting, enhancing transparency and accountability. So we know this advanced water treatment systems, it's a win-win situation for ship owners. So why is it not happening universally? Next slide, please. So these are some of the concerns that we see that are being raised, and changing from providing water in plastic bottles to providing water to seafarers via an advanced treatment system will not be without challenges. And this is where combined efforts across industry and other stakeholders like ports will be needed. We know that an overall sensitivity to plastic pollution doesn't necessarily change people's habits. We know that drinking water from plastic bottles is not environmentally friendly, and yet all of us still do it. And we know that the contribution from ships is considered small compared to plastic bottles from land. And then this again introduces the so what problem. Bottled water is sometimes or often seen as a necessity or a luxury for many seafarers. In addition, ship owners sometimes see the cost of the installation of a new system and upgrades. They think it's considered high, even though return on investment calculations show that it's significantly cheaper to provide water through advanced water treatment systems. But there can also be just a lack of trust in maintenance of the system, in routine testing of the water. There are concerns sometimes about the taste of the water among seafarers, health considerations. Sometimes seafarers worry about possible COVID, Legionella, or other contaminations. And in fact, these are all myths that are sometimes even cultural, but they need to be debunked. So next slide, please. So we will soon have we have been working for a while now on our best practice guide, and we aim to publish now in June, and it will aim to support our ship owner members through the provision of practical information, and also it will contain advice to enable ship owners to reduce and eliminate where possible, of course, single-use plastic bottles on board of ships. It will provide a step-by-step guide from decision-making to selection of different systems to even engaging seafarers, ensuring that the health and safety of those working on ships is always front and center of our attention. The focus on the removal of single-use plastic water bottles carried on board and reducing them through the provision of safe and high-quality drinking water generated by an advanced onboard drinking water system is considered the most and effective and safest way of tackling the problem. As I said, the guide will be published in June, and we will distribute it among ship owners, operators, and managers and port authorities. Next slide, please. Yeah, so coming to an end, I also I've been talking a lot about our single-use plastic and bottles project, but there's obviously, as some have been raised already, there's also other sources of marine plastic litter. And actually, I want to mention 3, gray water, nurdles, and paint. Focus a little bit on those 3. So gray water, yes, thank you. It's direct source of microplastic. It originates on board from sinks, showers, laundries, kitchens. Microplastic can enter the gray water in several ways. It can be synthetic fabrics, which is basically when you wash your clothes and they contain synthetic materials like polyester or nylon or acrylic, and they're being washed. Tiny plastic fibers are being shed. Those can enter the gray water. Also, personal care products. Many personal care products like toothpaste, facial scrub, shower gels, they contain microbeads, which are actually tiny pieces of plastic. And then thirdly, kitchen waste and kitchen wastewater. When you wash dishes or plastic instruments that are used in the kitchen, they can also shed tiny particles of plastic, and that will then also go down the gray water drain. So, and then when you discharge gray water is being discharged, it will introduce these microplastics into the marine environment. That having said, of course, the amount of gray water generated by a cargo ship is rather small. Nonetheless, it's again, also in this case, it's something that proactive action can address. And at BIMCO, we encourage our members to take voluntary and operational measures to reduce the amount of gray water and the potential for plastics within them, such as installation of washing machine filters, as well as reducing the use of products containing intentionally added microplastics wherever possible. We've been gathering mainly information on filtration units at this stage, and we seek to get more information from our members who might have some practical best experiences from using these systems on board. We are also undertaking at this moment a feasibility study to look at what better gray water management practices and options could be. Then going into the nurdles, so we have had some high-profile incidents in South Africa, Sri Lanka, and most recently, unfortunately, in Galicia. There we saw that due to some container losses, a lot of nurdles got into the marine environment. At BIMCO, we take a twofold approach to this. Firstly, we support initiatives that reduce the risks of container losses. And secondly, we take specific actions to reduce pallet loss. So we are promoting these recommendations to our members, and we support the introduction of mandatory measures. We're also working very hard with our members to understand what the most effective measure would be and the practicalities would be of implementing those. And then finally, another source is paints. No, not yet the last slide, thank you. So we support also here initiatives and efforts to improve biofouling management on ships to both reduce the risk of introduction of invasive aquatic species, but also to ensure that ships can operate as efficiently as possible. Where biofouling increases ships' drag and means more fuel is used, biofouling management is normally a combination of an anti-fouling system, like usually some paint or coating, and a cleaning regime. So either in water or during dry docking. There is emerging science that paints are contributing microplastics to the marine environment, and this will present challenges for shipping, where there will need to be a limit to biofouling and reduce plastics entering the marine environment. And yes, next slide, please. And this is my final one. Finally, so I'd like to touch on the issue of training and also why we are here today. The soon to be published best practice guide from BIMCO recognizes the importance of engaging stakeholder, as I hopefully also made clear in my presentation, and in making the importance of engaging stakeholders, particularly in making the move away from single-use plastics. So training and awareness play an essential role in buying from all these stakeholders, from highlighting the risk to the environment of marine plastic litter through the potential impacts of microplastics in food and drinking water. So we are delighted with a global partnership and that you're launching this online training. And we are very confident it will support also our efforts globally. And thank you. Over to my last slide and back to you, Fredrik.
Thank you very much, Gudrun, and thank you for this insight into the issue from the shipping perspective, but also, I think very importantly, the importance of awareness and training and the measures that are currently being taken to address the issues as well. So thank you. I can see that my fellow speakers are busy answering questions in the Q&A. That's very good. Keep the questions coming, as we might have time for a bit more live at the end as well. But now, over to our last speaker for the day, then that is Maciej Folbert. Maciej is a PhD researcher at the Department of Environmental Sciences of the Open Universiteit in the Netherlands, with an MSc in both marine technology and environmental sciences. Her research focuses on microplastic pollution from commercial shipping. And besides that, she has worked over the last 3 years with the UNEP and the Open Universiteit team to develop the GPML capacity development activities. So I hand over to you, Maciej.
Thank you very much, Fredrik, and thanks everyone for being here today. Great to see such a large group interested in the topic. So today I have the honor to announce our new e-learning course on sea-based sources of plastic pollution and marine litter. Over the past almost 10 years, Open Universiteit has been working with UNEP on capacity development for plastic pollution and marine litter. And most importantly on the MOOC on plastic pollution and marine litter, as I'm sure many of you are aware of. And this course is actually a follow-up of the section in the MOOC on sea-based sources of plastic pollution, of sea-based sources of plastic pollution and marine litter, that we now launch as a separate e-learning course, and that has been revised and updated together with some of the speakers actually of today to be entirely up to date to the actual state of knowledge. So in general, the objectives are to increase knowledge of participants with very different backgrounds, whether they're from governance or private sector or just interested citizens, and to support also self-led learning, so guide people to high quality resources and stimulate action. So also link from science-based information to practical actions. It's a brief course. It's open access. You just have to register, and anyone can take part. It's entirely free of charge, and it's also self-paced. So content is available at any time, and you can take parts of the course at your own convenience. And if you like, there is a possibility to obtain a certificate of participation at the end of the course. Next slide, please. So in terms of content, it consists of 3 learning units. One general introduction, where we tell you what you can expect in the course, and provide a very broad overview on the topic of sea-based sources, mainly building on the GESAMP report that Kisten told us about earlier in this webinar. Then we have 2 more in-depth sections, one on ALDFG and one on garbage from ships. And in the ALDFG part, we look at causes and impacts of ALDFG, but also on policy and governance approaches and the legal frameworks. And finally, we look at the solutions that different stakeholder groups can take from their perspectives. And this part was developed together with FAO and at GGGI. And they provided with the most recent insights. Then the next learning unit is on garbage from ships, and it was developed in close cooperation with the IMO. And it really builds on the main legal instrument for garbage from ships, which is MARPOL Annex 5, and it explains in detail what it is and how it links to plastic pollution, and it contains some quite practical in-depth assignments on the onboard and also port-based management of waste from ships and how that links to plastic pollution. And at the end of the course, there is a final assignment, which is mainly a reflection on for the participant on to see what your main findings are from the course and how you plan to use what you've learned in the course also in your own context, whether professionally or privately. And next slide, please. So in terms of activities and learning materials, so it will be a combination of text and external resources. So we refer a lot to external reports where you're asked to study sections and use that knowledge then to answer questions, to test, well, to help you better understand those resources and how it relates to the topic. It also contains quite practical case studies and examples to illustrate different geographical contexts and situations. Yes, the reflection already addressed, and yeah, each learning unit ends with a section of additional reading materials. So yeah, this is really what we think is really important to guide participants and anyone interested in the topic to the main resources, so that you can know where the good quality materials are to find and to meet your own learning objectives. Yes, then to the last slide. So the e-learning course is available as of today. You can access it through the link. I'm sure that we can also share it in the chat and with the QR code, and then you will find the tile that's displayed here, which you can link and where you can register. Yes, and we really hope that we've interested you for taking this course and study parts of it, and that you will find it useful. You're also welcome to share it with others. And if you have any feedback on the course or experiences, we are really happy to hear about that. The course also contains a feedback form. So yeah, we'd really like to hear from you. And yeah, we really hope that you enjoy the course and that it will be useful for you. So yes, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and hopefully all of those who are here today will sign up, of course, and spread the word about this course as well. I think it will be very useful. I would also like to say thanks to several of the webinar participants who have provided additional information and information sources in the chat and the Q&A. And also, since I take the opportunity being from IMO myself to highlight some complementary resources and outreach materials, especially on sea-based sources developed under the GLOW Litter project, the IMO FAO project GLOW Litter. And there's a link provided or shared with one of the participants in our chat box here as well. I think we have time for a few questions. We have about 5 minutes left. I'm picking a few here from the Q&A. I'm wondering, there's a question if we can get the link on the e-learning course kindly, and you already provided that, Marcia, so thank you. I'm wondering also here, there's a question regarding wind turbines from Peter Jankole. If there's any estimates on paint and polyester microplastics from wind turbines. Would you, Kirsten, have any idea? Is this something that GESAMP has looked at all?
Yeah, we have not, but it's certainly something we should be, something to bring to the attention of GESAMP members, but as part of our working group 43, it's not been something we've been investigating, but it's a very interesting thought. Thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you, Kirsten. And I see a question from Sharif. Thank you for presentations. And this participant is from Lebanon and is highlighting several activities done regarding extraction of ghost gear from the sea, as well as bottom marine litter and the study of microplastics. And wondering if there's any possibility for collaborating on projects to continue such activities. Maybe that's something for Hannah, perhaps?
Thank you. I was just trying to start typing. Yeah, definitely happy to discuss further and see what opportunities there are for collaboration. Of course, the GGGI prides itself, I guess, on bringing together different organizations and connecting different entities to continue to advance best practices and solutions locally. So we'd be more than happy to discuss further. So I think the presentations are going to be circulated in my emails. I'm pretty sure my email is in the slides, so happy to connect offline.
Thanks, Hannah. And I see one question that just came in here, and I think, sorry, again, back to Kirsten. How's the plastic from river contributing to the issue of marine litter? Is there any data on the quantification between riverine input and other sources? Because plastic waste from river. Yeah,
thank you. Great question. And really it's the lack of solid waste management in many countries that where significant amount of solid waste is making it into river systems and via river systems into coastal areas and the ocean. A lot of the estimations of riverine inputs were important contributors to Jenna Jambek's paper that estimated the quantity of plastic going into the ocean every year. So when we talk about land-based sources, we are including riverine systems as sources of that plastic because it just tend to concentrate poorly managed solid waste from land and funnel that plastic into the ocean. So short answer is yes, estimates of riverine inputs have been very, very huge components and critical parts of the global estimates of plastic in the ocean. It's a great question.
Thank you. And I think I had a question lined up that you picked, Marcia. Yeah.
Yeah, it contains 3 questions actually. So I'm doing the third one on the language of the e-course, but the other 2 are for someone else, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'm just checking my timing here. Excellent. Okay, let's see. An interesting question here. If AI can be used in research on marine plastic litter. Any thoughts about that? Anyone in the panel who would have a thought on that? Quite topical these days. No, that maybe
I mean, I don't have a huge amount of technical expertise with regards to that, but I think it is definitely an area of exploration, like an expanding area of exploration to see how it can be used to help locate where gear loss or pollution in general, plastic pollution in general is in the ocean, in an effort to then guide where remediation efforts can be prioritized. And Kirsten, I'll pass the baton to you.
Oh, thanks, Hannah. I totally agree with you. I guess I would say that the research we're doing currently is GESAMP Working Group 43, and we're not coming across studies published yet on the use of AI in this space, but I would imagine that there's the potential to mine data from large data sets that aren't I mean, again, it's not my area of expertise either, but I could see the potential in mining large data sets for better information around ocean-based sources of marine plastic.
Thank you, Gudrun. I think you had something to add there, maybe?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with the previous speakers, and we are currently using AI to explore data that's available in the IMO, all IMO submissions. So maybe if we get all this up and running, it would be interesting to expand to other areas like UNEP or what have you. So yeah, food for thought. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. I know we're past the hour, but if it's okay with the speakers, we take 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up. Are you still okay with that? Thank you. Okay, then I will pick one here from Mahesh Pradhan asking, is EPR applicable for ghost gear? And how do we engage the private sector? I guess that's Hannah again.
Sorry, couldn't find the unmute button. Yes, EPR is definitely something that's being considered with regards to fishing gear. The EU have actually got regulations coming into effect beginning of 2025. So we're actually going to be engaging with our private sector members as to how this is actually going to come into practice in real life, I guess, from putting it into policy and how it can be integrated, and also how we can look at potential provisions as well within the ILBI. So we have been looking at the example under the EU regulation and thinking about how we can integrate that within our advocacy work in the ILBI and bringing obviously the private sector into those conversations as well to make sure that they're meaningful processes and provisions implemented.
Thank you, Hannah. Okay, I'm picking a final question because I think we're running out of time from Sofia Garcia from the Azores asking or saying that a part of their beach monitoring program, many of the items frequently found are related to lobster harvesting in the US. Is there any activity already opting for more sustainable equipment when it comes to lobster harvesting? Kirsten, I suspect.
Yeah, great question. And I absolutely, this gear moves around the planet in just incredible ways. The gear lost in one country can travel thousands of miles and impact, as Hannah noted, especially small island nations. I would say that most of the innovation and research occurring right now with regard to changing gear systems in order to address the problem of abandonment, loss, and discard of fishing gear is with the trap fisheries. And so, yes, there are several studies underway to look at options for trap gear, and it's really around reducing the risk. There are a couple motivators. One is to reduce the loss of trap gear, because as most of you are probably aware, most trap gear has a single rope and a buoy to the surface, and when that buoy is cut or is pulled underwater, that gear can't be found, it's lost, and it can go on to continue to trap marine life. So there are various studies looking at how to improve the technologies to reduce that that loss, and also the potential for that rope gear to be an entanglement hazard, especially for large cetaceans. So yeah, in trap gear is where a lot of that research is happening.
Thank you, Kirsten. And we're now 5 minutes past the hour, so I will wrap up. But there are some questions still in the Q&A, so please feel free to answer those if you have time, my dear panelists. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And as we wrap up this insightful webinar on sea-based sources for marine litter and plastic pollution, I want to express our sincere appreciation and gratitude from the GPML to our speakers, and for all of you for your active participation in today's discussion. I think we've explored a number of very important topics, shared very valuable knowledge, and discussed innovative solutions, and also raised a few questions for the future. So thank you once again, everyone, for your engagement and commitment, and I wish you all a great day, and please stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.